I am so excited because tonight is movie night. And it's not just like any movie night. Tonight is the first movie night we're having on the truck. We just got some window blind from the local hardware store to use as our screen, which looks amazing. And we are going to put out our picnic blanket and we have the projector ready, and then we're just gonna watch a movie. But while Dan is getting everything ready, I just want to say thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring a portion of this week's video. Because we work online, we try our best to not be on our screen on a day-to-day basis all the time. You know, aside from editing the video, uploading the video, replying to comments, checking emails, managing our website, checking our store, chatting with Patreon on Discord. Like I said, we try. But from time to time, we do like to enjoy a quality movie night. And because we travel so much, it happens a lot that some shows or movies that we want to watch are just not available in the country that we're in. Some other platforms, they don't even open outside of the US. To fix that, we have a VPN. And it's a virtual personal. A VPN is a virtual personal network, and what it does is it lets you travel to another country without ever taking a boat, a train, a car, or a plane. So what it does really, it changes your IP address on your computer to let your computer believes and your browser believe that it's in a different country. So let's say we want to watch a show on Netflix that is not available in Italy. All we have to do is go to the Surfshark settings and change it back to a place like the US, and boom, voila. Now, the internet has improved and become so much more secure over the years, and most of the websites out there are already encrypted. So if you see that little padlock on the side of your browser, then you know that it's relatively safe. But a VPN does add an extra layer of protection to keep all your personal information secure, your browsing history is secure, your passwords are secure, and most importantly, it keeps all your data safe from all the companies out there stealing your data and selling them in exchange for targeted ads. I know there are a lot of VPN companies out there, and it took us a long time to find the right one, but the cool thing about Surfshark is that you can connect all of your devices, unlimited amount of devices, with one account. So if you do want to try it out, make sure you check out the link below to have your first 3 months completely free. And on that note, we're gonna watch a movie.
Today we are ripping out all of the rest of the electronics in our boat. We just have the mast removed so that all the forward stuff is clear, but because we needed the motor to motor over to the boatyard and back, we haven't removed any of the electronics behind us. And because the cockpit lockers, the hull is just as weak and needing to be secured as the rest of the boat, today we're going to be taking out all of the electronics, the batteries, the motor controller, all the inverters, all of the things that we've built up and wired over the years. It is all coming out, and our boat's going to be that much more stripped down to a bare hull.
Yeah. We figured today would be a perfect opportunity for us to share with you all the biggest tips that we've learned along the way if you're planning or if you're thinking of going electric on your sailboat.
If you are planning to install an electric motor in your sailboat, I think the #1 place to start is choosing the electric motor, because everything else in that system is sort of built up around the motor that you go with. When we first started, there was hardly any manufacturers making dedicated electric motors for sailboats. There was a couple that were doing like golf cart conversions and things like that, but very few were designed and built from the ground up to go in the marine environment. And now there seems to be dozens of electric motor companies all offering some version of an electric thing that will spin your propeller shaft. That doesn't mean that they're all created equally. But if you're on a sailboat and you plan on generating most of your own electricity from regen, which to us is sort of the whole reason why you'd want to go electric in the first place, there's actually still only one motor on the market that prioritizes regen and actually has published numbers on what those regen stats are, and that's the one that we have, the Ocean Volt Servoprop. There are dozens of other companies all advertising electric motors, and none of them have proven regen numbers. Technically, all electric motors are capable of regen, but the boats either have to be sailing very quickly or you need multiple propellers in order to get regen to work properly. A forward propeller, a reverse propeller, and a regen propeller, and a sailing propeller. So currently on the market, which is quite surprising, no other motor manufacturer is taking the propeller as seriously as the servoprop that we have. That takes out a huge priority of why you'd want to go electric in the first place, is to generate power while you're sailing.
Yeah. So to figure out the question of which electric motor is right for your boat, you need to first answer one question, and that basically the top question is, do you care or want viable regen or not? And if the answer to that question is no, then you have a whole list of motor available to you. If the answer to that question is yes, then you have
very short list.
Very short list. And if you guys are a little bit confused about what regen is, then it's basically, in a nutshell, the ability to recharge your batteries using your propeller while you're sailing. Since you're dragging a propeller into the water anyway, you can use that time to recharge your batteries, which is a big improvement for the cruising life. And I think the number one question when it comes to regen is slowing down the boat while you're moving because of that drag of the propeller. But the reality is, if you're cruising, it doesn't really make that big of a difference.
Yeah. We've tried testing. We've tried like watching our speed through the water and like turning regen on and seeing if it goes down at all in any significant way. And yeah, I mean, if you're in a match race against other identical sailboats and one had regen on and one didn't over the course of a long enough race, you probably notice a difference. But the thing is, there's so many other factors involved in what makes a boat sail at what speed that regen is just not significant. Like, we've tried, we turn it on and like, I mean, when you're offshore sailing, your boat speed goes up and down by 1.5 knots to 2 knots anyway. You surf down a wave, you're at 9, you go up a wave, you're at 5, like a gust of wind, you go faster. So we've tried looking to see if we can slow it down, and if it's noticeable, maybe it's 1/4 knot or 1/3 knot when we turn regen on. But it's so hard to even tell if that's why we're slowing down or not, because we'll turn it off and the boat speed will stay the same, and then we'll turn it on and it'll go faster, and we'll turn it off and it'll go slower. Like, I mean, you're dragging something through the water. It probably will slow you down, but it's such a small percentage of the power that the sails are putting into the whole system that it's not like you turn regen on and you slow down by 1/2 knot. So we haven't been able to prove how much it slows you down because it's just not enough to be able to be calculated.
And it's a big difference if you plan on cruising with the boat versus if you're using the boat just for races.
Yeah.
If you're racing, then yes, like 1/2 knot does make a difference because you want to use every single factor on your that you can get, like everything you want it to be in your favor. But also, if you're racing, if you're especially a day racer, then you don't need regen because you're charging out the dock, you go out for your race, and then that's enough for you to come back to the dock and charge again.
And if you're cruising, you're out long enough that it doesn't matter if you get there in 19 days or 19.5 days. Who cares?
Exactly. So if you're planning on cruising on an all-electric boat, then regen should definitely be on your radar. How you can compare between what you would have with a diesel motor as opposed to what you need with an electric engine, because it's not apples to apples. You can't just take 30 horsepower diesel engine and say like, oh, I need a 30 kilowatt motor.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of sort of, there hasn't been a set standard on how those comparisons are done. There's some electric motor manufacturers, especially the ones that prioritize outboards, and they advertise their electric outboard in horsepower, which doesn't make any sense at all. There are some numbers to convert and get close. We have the calculations on our website. Generally speaking, rule of thumb, if you already have a diesel motor in your boat, take those horsepower, divide by 4, and that's going to get you really close to the same amount of kilowatts it's going to take to push your boat to that speed. For instance, we had a 28 horsepower motor from the factory on this boat that was upgraded to a 33 horsepower. So if you take, say, 32, kind of average between the two, divide by 4, you get 8. Call that 8 kilowatts. And as far as we've found, we can't push our boat more than 8 kilowatts anyway. 8 kilowatts is full power, and we're doing 7 knots on a headwind. Like, it's as much power as our boat can ask for, even though our motor's rated for 15 kilowatts. So the cool part about electric is you don't actually have to get those horsepower just right like you do on a diesel, where you have to match the prop to the motor and all of that, because The weight between an 8 kilowatt motor and a 20 kilowatt motor isn't going to make much difference. If you use less power, like if you're motoring slowly, you're not losing any efficiency. Whereas a diesel, you click it in idle and you're motoring at 3 knots. For us, we can go from 0 kilowatts all the way up to 8 kilowatts as a nice smooth curve in between. So if you only use 1 kilowatt, you're not like wasting a whole bunch of efficiency by not using the full 10 kilowatts, for instance. So our general rule of thumb when people ask us is take whatever horsepower you have, divide by 4, and then sort of like round that number up to the nearest one that's divisible by like 5. Usually motors are rated in like 10 kilowatts, 15 kilowatts, 20 kilowatts.
Like 5
Yeah, they're
increments.
usually rated in increments of 5-ish, and that'll get you close. On our boat, we would have spec'd a 10 kilowatt motor, which would have been fine. They make this motor in 10 kilowatts. We happen to get the 15 kilowatt version because why not? The motor's the same. It's just the programming that's different. So that's fine. And you can change the programming and you can map the throttle and you can do all that programming after, which is really, really nice. So you can match the motor and the controller and your prop after you purchase it. One thing that definitely is beneficial for a larger motor is if you get a larger motor, but you're only using it at like 50% capacity, it's not going to overheat nearly as much as if you get a smaller motor and you're pushing it to 100 or 110% of its capacity all the time. Then it will start to overheat because you're stressing that motor out. So it's much better to have like a 10 or a 15 kilowatt motor and only ever use it up to like 7 or 8 kilowatts than it would be to have a 3 kilowatt motor and push it to 5 kilowatts like we used to with our first one. So that's one of the benefits of having a slightly larger rated motor is that you're not going to be stressing it out as much.
Yeah. And another big tip for going electric is 48 volts.
Yeah.
Everything being 48 volt makes a huge difference on the boat.
It's sort of become the standard. When we first started out, there was a lot of 72 volt, 96 volt stuff, 24 volt stuff. But over the years, it's settled on 48 because there's so many components available. All the golf cart stuff is 48. Victron makes a full set of 48. It's easy to wire batteries to 48. 48 volt DC isn't really a dangerous current to work with. It's not going to electrocute you when you touch it. So it's a pretty safe current to work with. And up to the 50-ish foot boat range, you don't really need more voltage anyway.
Yeah, and now companies like Maxwell's, for instance, they make 48 volt windlasses. So, because a lot of times people have like a diesel engine, but they still need their diesel engine to
run their windlass.
Run everything else, or the generator to run everything else. So being able to have everything connected into one big DC system makes it it's valuable.
And with the larger battery banks, you can get huge 48 volt DC inverters, so you can still run all of your AC loads without running a genset. So we have an induction and a microwave and vacuum cleaners and all of the typical 220 and 120 volt stuff we can just run off of inverters, and we don't need a high capacity generator to run any of that stuff.
There are a lot of different types of electric systems out there, from all electric to hybrid electric to something we call hybrid diesel to all diesel, obviously. And we're not going to get into that in this video. That will be for a completely separate video because we can talk about that for hours.
We figured there's about 8 or 9 different classifications between all electric to pure diesel. If you're planning a hybrid system, either a diesel hybrid or an electric hybrid, and you're planning to build a generator or a diesel engine into that system anyway, then there's tons of different options available for you. None are necessarily better or worse than others. Electric motors are relatively standard technology. They've been around for a long time. They're well understood. And so they're all kind of the same if you're not worried about regen. And it's mostly just about the customer service of the company you're working with, how well they integrate with your current systems, how robust the programming is.
And honestly, like the quality of the material as well. Like not all electric motors are made equal. Some electric motors, and it's good to go and see and feel for yourself, because you will feel the difference between something that's made in plastic versus something that's made in metal.
One of the big things you should look for is a liquid-cooled electric motor. But if you do have a hybrid setup where you're going to have the ability to motor for more than a few hours, liquid cooling is going to make a huge difference, because the problem with electric motors is that the hotter they get, the less efficient they become. And so if you really start maxing the motor out, or it starts to get too hot, it's going to start pulling more and more electricity from your battery bank just to maintain that speed. So it does add a little bit more complexity, but liquid cooling makes a huge difference in a motor system. And it doesn't have to be raw water. We just have a cooling converting fin on the side of ours. But because we don't have a hybrid boat, we don't have to worry about our engine overheating because we never really use it long enough for it to get hot. Stairs are going to be like this.
Like a watertight bulkhead?
Well, it doesn't have to be watertight. It just has to come up to above the water line, like that, and then kind of like over and back. So if we do have to come down here and work on it, we can.
Cool.
All the wires come out the top. All right, we're good. Cockpit locker.
Cockpit locker. Well, everything that we needed to remove from this side of the boat is removed. We're not removing the motor itself because we're not changing its position. We're not changing the motor, but also we're underwater. So if we take this off now, the boat would literally sink. So now we're gonna get out, get into the cockpit, get cozy in there because we're gonna remove the batteries next.
You're gonna just put the ladder back in.
What? That's no fun. Chalk me. And we're out.
Nice. Red point, full send.
I know.
Have we ever both been in? I'm sure we've both been here before.
Have we?
You're gonna be over here.
It's slippery.
Yeah, it's wet.
Okay.
Okay. Sit up on the bench.
I'm trying. Oh, that's not too bad.
This is comfy.
Sure. All right. So here we are in a cockpit locker because we're going to talk about these
Batteries.
guys. The batteries.
Difficult to access those batteries. We're going to be addressing that in the new renovation. These batteries are coming out, and instead, so let's back up a little bit.
I don't know.
Over here, you'll see our battery bank. We've got 12 lithium-ion batteries in there, and they're from Battleborn, and they've worked okay, but they're not really meant for EVs. They're meant for, like, house loads and stuff. So we've had a few issues with them, but more importantly, it's nice to be able to access your batteries to inspect them and check on things and status report and all those. And underneath the cockpit locker, it's a pain in the butt. So what was here before was our old fuel tank for the diesel, which we took out. And what's going to be going back here is going to be a water tank. And the batteries are actually going inside the boat. So all the water is outside of the living area, and just electronics and stuff is inside the living area. So they're going to be more easily accessible to view, check, diagnose issues if we have them.
Yeah, because you don't really need to access inside the water tank very often. All you need to know is the level of the water, which we can do now with our, a digital screen. So
yes,
we don't need to have access to it all the time.
And that way we'll have one water tank, so we don't have to worry about switching them between port and starboard when we're tacking or whatever. And the batteries, we're probably going to be putting in more batteries than we have now, so that weight's going to be transferred forward and lower in the boat, so it's going to actually be a benefit to our sailing capability rather than hindering it.
Exactly. Okay, so
batteries.
Let's talk about batteries.
Let's talk about batteries.
The first thing that comes to mind most of the time when we mention the word batteries is it's expensive. And yes, batteries are really expensive, especially when you start thinking about an electric motor, because you need a lot more batteries than you would for a diesel motor.
However, in the last 10 years, lithium-ion technology has not only significantly reduced in price, it's significantly gone up in quality. So looking at what you can get now versus what you could get when we first started, it is significantly cheaper and significantly safer and significantly better, and you have way more options available to you. An electric motor for your boat is probably the same price or cheaper than an equivalent diesel, but it's the batteries or the genset or the rest of the system that start to kick that price over the apples to apples price tag of a diesel install. But the way we see it is the batteries are more like your fuel tank, and you're going to be filling up your boat with diesel fuel for the next 30 years. Whereas with batteries, you buy them once and you never have to pay to fill them up again, because you can get power from regen, wind, and solar, or plugging in at a dock. Lithium-ion batteries all have a charge cycle lifespan. Some are 500, some are 1,000 charge cycles. I can tell you in 5 years of owning these batteries, we have cycled them 79 times. So of the 800 that they're rated for, we're good for another 50 years. Was that? Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
And after that, they'll still be 80% of their original capacity. So these batteries, as long as they don't get physically damaged, are going to be around for a very long time. Their life cycle is very long. It's not just every time you charge them up and take them down. It's every time you bring them down to 0 and back up to 100 counts as a charge cycle, or maybe 10%, something like that. And because we kind of float ours between 40% and 90%, we've barely stressed them at all. They're going to last for a much longer. So even though they're not going to be on our boat, they're going to live a life on somebody else's boat or in an RV somewhere, and you can just keep using them over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And even at 80%, you can put them in a backup power source to your house or something 20 years from now down the road. They're still going to be functioning. So the fact that you are spending that money up front rather than slowly trickling out of your bank account every time you do an oil change or a belt change or fill up your diesel tank, you know, after I think our friends did a comparison. I think it's after 4 or 5 years of an equivalent amount of motoring, the batteries start to pay for themselves. So it is more money up front, but then you're done and you don't have to pay for them ever again. So there's so many arms. Hello.
I know, we're getting like really cozy. I like it. It's like romantic.
Yeah. Romantic date.
This is our definition for a romantic date.
Date night.
It's like how much closer can we get inside of the boat?
This is as far apart as we normally get, I think.
Yeah.
This feels about right. You almost have too many options available when it comes to lithium these days. And not all batteries are created equal. In fact, most batteries are probably trash for an electric motor EV setup. So not to bash on a lot of the manufacturers out there, what they're making is for house loads. It's to run your refrigerator, like these Battleborns. They're not meant to run an EV. And we've probably broken all manufacturers' recommendations wiring them the way we have, and broken all warranties using them the way we're using them. So we're not bashing all of them. If you plan on putting lithium in for your house loads in your RV or your boat, this isn't meant for you. This is meant for people running an electric motor on an electric boat, and they have a large battery bank as a house bank and a motor bank. That's what we're talking about. It's less to do with the makeup of the battery, and it has a lot more to do with how those batteries are managed. Because unlike lead acid, lithium ion, all of it needs an internal BMS, battery management system, to make sure that all the cells are being charged appropriately, and if one goes out of sync or one fails, that the safety mechanisms kick in and you don't start a fire. And that's what separates really good manufacturers from everybody else, is they take the BMS and the safety side of the batteries very seriously.
Don't just get any batteries out there.
Don't just get the cheapest ones.
Yes, because even lithium ion, like there's a lot of new companies out there that are coming up with all different types of lithium ion batteries, and make sure that whatever you're getting has been tested, because they can be dangerous if they're not managed properly.
We will leave a list in the description of this video to some of the manufacturers that we know and would trust putting battery banks in sailboats specifically. The list is very short. It might be controversial, but that's our opinion at this point. One of the major problems with the whole marine industry in general is that it's incredibly unregulated, especially the private pleasure side that we're playing in. There are no regulations for what you can and can't do inside of a boat. And so there's no real drive for manufacturers to certify or regulate what they're doing. Unlike airplanes or cars or any other industry, boats are still incredibly unregulated. And so that can be quite dangerous, especially when you start playing with lithium batteries in a salty, wet environment.
Yeah. And when we are going to be redoing the systems on our boat, our battery bank is also going to change. And so we'll do another video about what batteries we chose for UMA 2.0, I guess.
UMA 9.7, I think we're on.
And why we chose it and what the safety features are.
Like most things in the industry, it's not like it's an on or off. It's not black and white. It's not like these batteries are good and they'll be fine, and those batteries are shit and they're going to burn your boat down. There's a lot of buffer in between. For instance, these Battleborns that we have, they've been generally fine. Most people who have them on like a house or an RV or a small boat where you're using it to run your refrigerator have no issues with them whatsoever. They're plug and play replacements for a typical like lead acid, like a Trojan T105. They're the same size. You just have to change your charge controller to adjust the charge settings a little bit. Super easy, great batteries. But when you're relying on them as your primary means of supplying power to your propulsion system, and one little fault.
It's a fly.
And you have one little fault or error at a critical moment, just like with the diesel motor that gets a little water or something wrong with it and your engine dies, you can crash your boat. You can crash another boat. You can drift up onto the rocks. It has happened to us 3 times, I think, in the last 5 years that we've had these, that they've just gone completely flat while we're in the middle of motoring for no reason at all. They weren't dead. They were getting solar. But because the BMS decided something didn't look right, it just shut the battery down for safety reasons, and it left us without power. Luckily, we've become pretty good sailors over the years. Losing our engine is not something we worry about. We can just put the sails back up and keep sailing to safety while we figure out what to do. It was never an issue, but it can happen. So if you get batteries that are sort of in the middle there somewhere, you might have more experiences like that versus ones that are tested and tried and true and sort of more, I want to say bomb-proof, but more reliable.
And it's a difficult subject, right? Because the more the industry is evolving, the more technology are evolving, the more new improvement we're having. So new companies will emerge and they need time to test that new technology. So it's hard to pick an older technology knowing it has been tested and it is reliable versus a new technology that on paper is better, but it hasn't been tested yet. So it's a hard decision to make, and I guess ultimately it's a personal one if you want to be one of the people who test something for the first time. Like, we do a lot of testing, but we know the risk as well, versus if you're looking for something that will last you 30 years and you know it's been already tested by somebody else. It depends. You can have as many batteries as you can take on your boat, and the weight. And, I mean, you have to factor in the weight, you have to factor in the size of the batteries, and it also, because if you want to motor more,
you need more batteries.
You need more batteries, but to that extent is also, if you have more batteries, you need a way to charge them.
Yep.
So if you have a smaller boat and you have a huge battery bank, it doesn't really make sense, because then you would take forever to recharge your battery bank.
Well, and then if you have a hybrid boat, you don't need a large battery bank, because you just kind of need a battery bank long enough to sort of run your house loads and a little bit of motoring in and out of a marina, on and off anchor, running your windlass. And then if you are going to do extended motoring, you're going to be using the diesel side of your hybrid system anyway. So there's a personal threshold for everyone out there, somewhere between, you could buy a small battery bank and then a bigger generator and fuel tank, a bigger battery bank, smaller generator. But yeah, like Kika said, it has a lot more to do with how you're putting that power back in. Because if you don't have a means of putting all that power back in, there's no point in having a massive battery bank. Currently, we're running around 12 kilowatt hours. And that's been plenty for us, honestly. We can run the boat for a week and a half or so without any sunshine at all. And we can motor for, a few hours if we need to, which has been plenty. And we're probably going to be putting in a larger battery bank when we put new batteries in this boat. But that's mostly just because the technology has improved so much that for the same weight as this bank, we can actually almost double the capacity of batteries. So we kind of may as well. And now that we have really good regen, that actually is beneficial, because we've actually come into the situation a few times where we're out sailing with regen on and our batteries are full. And so it would be nice to just continue sailing on longer passages and be able to bring even more power into the system, so we can spend more time on anchor in places that don't have as much sunshine.
Yeah, and also we're going to be upgrading and improving our solar panels,
Yes.
which is going to help much more, because our solar panels are very old and I'm pretty sure one of them doesn't work. Would it be better to have one giant battery bank versus a battery bank for the motor and then a battery bank for the house? And we've been
sort of unproven.
Yeah, we've been kind of like on the fence of answering this one, because we personally have one big bank that does everything, but I do see the appeal of having two, because then you have somewhat of a backup.
So most of the, I want to say most of the production versions of electric that we've seen, like on the Salona or Konas or stuff, some of those, they'll have a large battery bank that's lithium that runs all of their loads and their inverters, and they charge, and the solar comes into that bank. And then they'll normally have a smaller, like a AGM battery that acts as like a filter for the house loads. And we kind of see why they're still doing this. For instance, when our battery bank has gone flat a few times, everything dies, because we run our 12-volt system off of DC converters. And so we lose radio, we lose GPS, we lose our depth sounder, we lose autopilot. It's zero. The boat, it's like we got hit by lightning. The boat's at zero. So we kind of see the benefit to that. We're going to experiment and do some testing and calculations if that's how we're going to be building the new system. Because then if the motor bank does go down, you at least still have your radio. You can call SOS, you can call a towboat. You still have your chart plotter and depth sounder and autopilot for a while, for a few hours while you figure out what's wrong with your battery bank.
So yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be the equal amount of capacity between the two, but like a small battery bank for your house load as an emergency backup and a big battery bank for the rest of the stuff. It would be
It's sort of like having your computer on a BMS in your house. So like when the power shuts out, your computer has time to shut off, those kinds of things. It's an interesting setup. We definitely see the benefits of both. It's a little bit more complicated, and you have two batteries you have to manage the voltages on, but it's currently sort of the standard is to have a large lithium bank and then just a single lead acid battery or AGM battery that filters your house loads through. And it's always constantly being topped up by the lithium, and your house loads are always constantly being drawn out of it. The other thing that it does is it eliminates the sort of lighting flicker. Like for instance, when we flush our toilet, the LED lights sort of like dim down just for a second because our DC converters are getting overloaded with that sort of peak loads. So it also helps smooth out those things as well. I'm kind of excited to see how these battery boxes have held up because I think they've got some water damage, not gonna lie.
Probably.
Yeah, that's the other downside to having batteries underneath your cockpit locker is every time you open it in the rain, some water gets in and it's wood and it was never meant to be permanent.
All right, now we have to Tetris our way out of it.
I'm gonna let you get out first. My hand's all covered in like sticky bilge goo.
Bilge goo.
Sticky bilge goo.
All right, your turn.
Soon there's gonna be so much more space in here. It's gonna feel palatial. You know that game, playing Doctor, where you like try not to touch the edges or you'll get electrocuted? Mm-hmm. It's just like that. Yep.
Whoa.
Full of water. Oh, that's gross. Oh, it smells so bad. I was wondering if these were going to have water in because we never put any kind of like drain holes in the bottom. Well, if there wasn't a reason to move the batteries before, this is definitely a reason. These wood boxes that we built are like full of mildew and have been holding water in the bottom, which smells so bad. Like worse than septic tank bad.
So many wires on this boat.
Good job, good job.
Okay. Well, guys, this is gonna be.
Look, underneath our cockpit.
I don't think we've ever been able to sit underneath our cockpit before because
There's always
always stuff underneath here. We had the diesel, then we took it out, then we had batteries, and now we can have a whole aft cabin down here.
Maybe you can. I don't think I'm gonna fit. There's actually more space down here than I expected.
There's a lot of space. So the plan is to not reuse this space for batteries again?
No. So as we've discovered, all of the electronics in our entire boat have been mounted to the back of this bulkhead, which is like the aft side of our galley. It's a terrible place to mount electronics because if you ever have an issue with electronics, you need to access them. And it is like the most inaccessible place in our entire boat.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we're going to be flipping. All the electronics are going inside. All the water stuff is going outside here in the cockpit locker. And all the dirty paddleboard, sails, wet stuff. This bulkhead's going to get replaced, and we're going to probably make it watertight-ish so that everything in the cockpit stays in the cockpit and everything in the cabin stays in the cabin. But ripping out these electronics has been like on my bucket list since we started putting them in, because we've been layering shit on top of shit for 10 years.
I think this would be our final tip.
Yeah, definitely having a decent plan from the beginning for where all the components are going to go. Part of the problem with us is that most of the components on our boat now didn't even exist when we started putting things on the boat, so we had no idea. But now that we have all the components that we want and that are going to be going back in, and we know where they're going to go, it's going to be much easier to wire everything, keep it all clean and organized, and run through conduit. And hopefully, fingers crossed, when we need to add a light switch, we won't have to rip the whole boat apart.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
But, oh man, we have so many wires and cables.
And this isn't even all of them.
So many.
We've already taken out like everything forward of this bulkhead, which was a lot of wire. And now the cockpit's full of more wire, and there's even more wire that we still have to take out. So,
and I mean, it's not like none of them had a purpose. Every single wire had a purpose.
Yeah. If you have things easily accessible, like the major bus bars and the breaker panels and the things where the wires are going to terminate, then running the wires through properly laid out conduit is quite easy, and then you have access to the things you need to have access to. But making connections up underneath the cockpit locker above the batteries in places like you're never going to have access to again, not the smartest idea.
Yeah, and especially batteries, like you need to access them. Like when we removed the batteries, as you guys saw, we had 5-year-old water in there.
They should be inspected like every 6 months for sure.
Yeah.
And also the way that we had ours wired up, where there were 4 batteries in series and then 3 banks of those in parallel. We were supposed to be disconnecting all of the batteries and like individually charging them back up to their full 12 volts, just to make sure all the batteries were at the right voltage before rewiring them together again. We never did that because our batteries were such a pain in the ass to access. So that's probably one of the reasons why we've had them go flat in the past, just because they weren't, each individual battery wasn't really well balanced, and so it kind of threw the whole system off. So if they were more easily accessible, we would have been doing that on a much more frequent basis, and probably would have avoided those problems. We have a little bit more wiring just to clean up and pull out of here and take some conduit off, but then we're going to be grinding down the inside of the hull and the cockpit locker too, and preparing for fiberglass. So
yeah, I know we've been saying we've been preparing for fiberglass for a while, but
that's the reality.
It's all part of it. We're still preparing. We've been preparing since the beginning.
Just pulling these wiring out has taken us 3 days. So
yeah,
it definitely takes time to pull all this out and to do it properly and to get all these little bits and pieces straightened out, because if we're starting from scratch and building this thing up on a good foundation, we need to make sure it's actually a good foundation.
Yeah. On that note, hope you guys like this episode. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you look for that subscribe button, and then
lots more projects coming your way.
Lots more projects.
We are not even close to being done this.
We'll see you guys next week. Peace and cheers. Oh, I just put a giant handprint on the camera.